Okay, so let's explore the standard alert type. So we're going to dive into this particular alert. Once again, the standard alert type is all about counting the number of logs that match a given query, and then deciding more than or less than. So as with all alerts, you have this metadata at the top, the name, the description, the severity of the alert, and any labels. By the way, labels are really handy if you want to do things like define just cross-purpose labels like SLO or database or front-end application, that kind of thing. It's just a nice way of grouping things. One thing to note that when you're, we'll talk about this later, but there's a difference between clear and delete permanently. So when you're configuring the standard alert, the big thing is around the query, okay? So this is a Lucene query, so you can implement anything you want. For example, you could say, I don't know, you've got all these different fields here. So some of them have constant on them, like constant name. You could say anything like this, for example. So you can kind of have that. You can get rid of the quotes. Remember, it's just anything you can do with a Lucene query, you can do with this. So you can have this query. On top of this, you can then also filter by application and subsystem. This is a good idea. Make your query as specific as possible, because then it just minimizes the chances of other logs making their way in and causing false positives on your alarm. Then you can obviously specify application subsystem as well as log severity as well. So for example, I only want to alert on error logs, for example, coming out of Asia. Then you have some conditions down here. So firstly, more than. So more than is really straightforward. You say more than, let's say, 100 occurrences in 10 minutes. That means in a 10-minute time window, if there are more than 100 logs, then trigger an alarm. Really straightforward. Less than is the same but opposite. So if there are less than 100 occurrences in a 10-minute time window, then trigger. Notify immediately has no threshold or time window. As soon as this query returns any logs, trigger. And finally, there's more than usual. More than usual, super sophisticated. This is using a machine learning model to actually profile your data. So one thing to note here is that when you're using the more than usual feature, there is a 7-day sort of learning period where the alert is going to work out what your normal profile is. After that, the alert will begin to work. So more than usual, the minimum threshold is 100 there. So this is basically saying, let's say last week there were 50. This week there are 75. That won't trigger the alarm. It will only trigger if there's like 100 more than what one would normally expect. So more than usual, last week 50, this week is 175, that will trigger. If there's 151, that will trigger, but 149 won't. So you have to decide what an abnormal variance is. Another thing to point out as well with the more than usual alert type is that it works best with data that's kind of continuous. So if there's like a sporadic logs 1 hour and then nothing for 8 hours and another sporadic set of logs, it might not profile the data as effectively. Whereas continuous logs that are, an application that's constantly changing and pushing out logs all the time, that's the perfect kind of data profile for this kind of alarm. So just something to be aware of. Then of course you have your group by key. We discussed this in the previous section, but the group by key will enable you to group this alarm based on a given key or a given field. You'll notice that for more than and less than, you have a 2-level grouping. For more than usual, just a 1-level grouping. So we'll look at the 2-level grouping. Here you can say, okay, group by application name and also group by subsystem, for example, Coralogix metadata subsystem. So that's application name and subsystem. So you'll get one alarm or one alert, one email, one notification per application name and subsystem name. So think of the groupings. The groupings are always really, really important. It's crucial that you make sure you understand what the appropriate groupings are, because if you don't do any groupings, obviously at that point it's like a raw output. So every single individual unique value may trigger an alarm, and that'll cause alert spam and alert fatigue, which is all negative outcomes of too many alarms firing. You'll notice there's time window settings here. So what we've essentially said in this alarm is that if there are more than 100 occurrences within 10 minutes, then trigger. Now, there are 2 ways that this can be evaluated. The first is a rolling window. So let's say that I've configured my alarm to trigger every minute. It's an important one. Now, in a given 10-minute window, there are 105 occurrences of this given query, or 105 logs that match this query. It's like, okay, trigger the alarm. Now, because you set every minute, the next minute comes round, Coralogix is once again going to reevaluate your data. It's going to look at the previous 9 minutes plus the new 1 minute that's just passed. It essentially is reevaluating all those old logs plus the extra 1 minute. Okay, so this is what the rolling window does, and what it means is that you are going to get alarms potentially for most of the same set of logs. Okay, whereas dynamic duration will take into account when the last alarm fired. So if the alarm fires and then it checks again in a minute, like because of the notify every set at 1 minute, when it checks again, it won't take into account that previous 9 minutes because it already knows an alarm is fired to cover that data. It will try and wait it out. So this will affect how things are checked. So really, it's up to you. I would say that if you want to behave in the way that most alerting platforms function is with rolling window. So they will take old logs that have already been alerted onto account. But sometimes you have use cases where you don't want repeated alerts for data. So for example, alerts that are checking for sudden changes. For example, if your alert is checking for a sharp increase in data in log volume, then the rolling window may not be the one for you because that changes. You've already alerted on the fact that the change has happened, and if you have a rolling window, you may keep alerting on the same change, whereas dynamic duration will take that into account and not alert on that data. So that's just something to be aware of. It's an important configuration, but it may have an impact on how your alarm is functioning. We already covered notification groups and schedule, notification content in the previous section. We already covered verify alert. You'll notice that 0 alerts were generated for this particular data for this particular query and set of filters. So if I remove that filter, so nothing from the agent content essentially, which is great. And you'll notice here that we have this grouping. Now, one thing to note is that if you use the group by functionality, and you use keys that don't exist on the logs for which you have specified in your query, then your alarm will never fire. Okay, it won't all get put into one group. The groups will essentially cancel out and your alarm will never fire. So make sure that these keys that you use for your group by exist on the logs that you've specified. Okay, super important that you get that, otherwise you'll have a non-functioning alarm. So that's all the different ways that one can configure the standard alert. Next we'll look at metrics. There are a few different nuances there for how alerts should be defined, and also things about evaluation periods and that kind of thing.